The following lecture contains what we consider one of the biggest issues that the amateur, non-professional weightlifter encounters in their training. It's the reason you are spinning your wheels is you've got high velocity, you're training hard, you're training 6 days a week, but you've got zero trajectory. You're heading in no particular direction. You don't know where you are, you don't know where you're heading, you don't know where your start and end is. All you know is you're training and you want to get better and you're training hard, but you're not getting better. So if you can listen to the following lecture, understand the concept. Even if you don't know the finer details, that doesn't particularly matter right now. As long as you can get the idea into your mind that you putting yourself on a path somewhere, even if it's not the best path, as long as it's putting you in the general direction, you'll learn the details, hopefully, or you'll get someone else to do them for you. You will improve. You won't know yourself in a year's time. A bit if you're that person, you haven't PB'd your snatch or clean and jerk in 2 or 3 years, and let's be honest, you probably have a lot more progress to make. I promise you will make progress if you get behind some of these ideas. So listen to the following lecture, enjoy it, let me know if you have any questions, and hopefully you get something out of it. Now, if you want someone else to do that for you, if you want to do that programming, check out the Sika Strength app on iOS and Android. We have multiple weightlifting programs, dynamic loading adjustment, CoachBot, video library, updates nearly every month. Currently, we're averaging more than every month for improving the app, so we're always working on it and trying to make it the best product possible. So check it out below, iOS and Android. You get 7-day free trial for everyone signs up, so you can have a look around, so don't hesitate to download and have a look. At 100 kilos, and that final blue point at the end is maybe a new max of 125 kilos, and our current max is something like 120 or 122. And we are always moving through those particular points. We can't start halfway along that. We can't start near the end. We need to start at the start for a couple of reasons. And this goes the same for strength work, for running, gymnastics progressions, for snatching, for clean and jerking. There's particular places we need to start at and move through. You need to crawl before you can walk. You need to walk before you can run. And it's the same idea with this. So at that start section, so those first 3 blue dots, if they're individual sessions, they're what we might call an accumulation phase. But what that means is we're just doing some higher volume. We're doing some work capacity. We're getting a lot more reps at lighter weight. So we can focus on all those things that we learned today. So we're looking at that knees back and we're getting extra reps in. So, as you get heavier, you're getting that heavier clean and jerk, you're like, maybe you need to calm down a small bit. But that's not really a time where you can focus in on those pre-performance routines, those 2-3 things that Dara was saying you need to focus on. So you're going for a heavier snatch, and you're like, okay, it's a max snatch, you're really amped up, you've had a lot of caffeine, and you're supposed to focus on 2 or 3 different things. But it's not really a great time to ingrain those things and practice them. It's not a great time to be thinking about getting your knees back, because it needs to be automatic, because we need to be doing that as a reactive mechanism. We just need to be doing the snatch at those heavier weights. It needs to be ingrained. And the best place to practice that for weightlifting is that initial phase. So those first 3 dots, and we go super light. I'll give you an example. I started the training block this time. I hadn't snatched in about 18 months. I got, within 2 or 3 sessions, went back to 130 kilo snatch. And then for 2 months, I went back to weights like 70 kilos, 80 kilos, 90 kilos, 100 kilos, way below my max for weeks on end. I snatched 140 last week or 3 weeks ago, and now I'm back down to 70 kilo working sets, 80 kilo working sets. So when we're thinking about weightlifting programming, we're trying to slowly expose that snatch from a statue. It's like a big lump of marble, and we're just chiseling away at it. And the biggest thing most people get wrong is they spend most of their time around this section, because there's a couple of reasons that happen. A lot of times it's an ego thing, and it's not an egomaniac that you want to get better. Very often are people like, okay, if I don't touch those heavier weights, I'm not going to get better. You feel like, okay, if I go too far from them, if I'm snatching 100 kilos, and they might think, if I don't snatch 85 at least once a week, I'm definitely getting worse. But that's not the case. You're in fact actively making yourself worse by spending too much time there. You need to be moving through those sessions. So it needs to be a little bit different every week. Something needs to be changing. You need to be going a little bit heavier. You need to be changing the volume. You need to be progressing along. Something needs to progress from week to week. So you can't just show up to your sessions and hope for the best. The worst program is still better than no program. The thing that makes even hardly any sense is still far better than you just showing up randomly. And Most people don't make progress because they don't have a plan. So even if it's 50% effective, it's still far more effective than just showing up and doing random sessions. So that's probably the biggest thing I'd like you to get from programming, is that something is changing, something is progressing from week to week. And generally it should look like higher volume, lighter lifts, and then you're just moving through those weights. So it might look like, for example, you start with 5x3 snatch at 70 kilos. Next week you do 4 sets of 3 snatch at 75 kilos. Next week you do 5x2 at 80 kilos. The week after you do 3x1 at 85 kilos. Then we'll do a max or a heavy single, and then we don't waste any time. If the max didn't go great, we try and see what went wrong. We look at the technique, we look at did we do enough volume, and then we move on again and we reset and keep going. You'll just waste so much time. Too often people will spend too much time. For example, if your max is at 90 kilos, they'll spend weeks on end trying to do singles at 85, doubles at 80, and just repeat that over and over and over and over. And it's the most common people don't progress. The most common reason is people don't progress is because they're just not going somewhere and they're not on a particular plan. So that's the biggest thing I would say I think between the two of us, it has been about 26 years of coaching people in weightlifting now, and that's the biggest problem. It's not that you can't progress. It's not that you can't improve your snatch. Now, some people are far better than others. Some people snatch 100 kilos in the first couple of months. 2 years ago, I did a session with a gentleman's first ever time snatching. He'd never tried to snatch before. He'd been doing bodybuilding for years. And 4 weeks later, he snatched 100 kilos, and it was a good snatch. Like, it was really good. So some people just progress much faster. How long did it take you to snatch 100 kilos there?
Of actual weightlifting, probably 2 years.
So Darren took 2 years to snatch 100 kilos. I snatched 100 kilos after 10 months, I think. Some people might never snatch 100 kilos, but you can get better. You can hit those numbers. And a lot of times, people aren't at their genetic potential. I think I've seen one person out of thousands of people in years where I've been like, oh, that's your best snatch you could ever do. It's one person in literally thousands of athletes. So you can definitely progress from wherever you are. And this is the most important thing, I think, in terms of programming that I could get across to you, is not the exact details, not the exact variation. Technique, very important, of course, but just being on a trajectory somewhere, you sitting down for a few minutes, just get a few weeks planned out. You wouldn't believe the progress you'd end up making if you were just more diligent about what's going on. If you had it, even if it was once a week and you were just doing snatch and clean and jerk, and you had some kind of progression hoped for, even if you did it in 4-week progressions and you followed that general trend, I promise you would see incredible progress in a year if you looked back. You'd far more than you thought you could progress on. That's like the most important thing I wish I could impart on you. Everything else is very useful to know, and there's hours and weeks of specific stuff and program you could look at, but that idea, does that make sense? What questions have you on it?
So
yep.
Starting to program for yourself is
yes.
very overwhelming.
Of course.
A million different sources of information.
Yep.
What would you focus on there the first time you're like, okay, I want to try and
yes.
work this out? What would you focus on there for that first time?
So the idea that I'm going to have a start and an end point is the biggest thing, and I'm going to give it a reasonable time frame. So a reasonable time frame is particular time lengths. For most people, I think it's very reasonable to think in 8-week blocks, and then break those 8-week blocks up into 4-week blocks, I think is the best. So you've got an end point in 8 weeks, that's a reasonable end point to end up at. And then you have pretty definitive load for the next 4 weeks, a pretty good idea. And then at that midpoint, you assess and you go, okay, that went pretty well. I think I can keep going and end up at those end of 8 weeks. So you have an idea. You just start with, for example, 1 snatch session, 1 clean and jerk session. And you can keep it super basic. You can go, I'm going to do some snatching, snatch pulls or snatch deadlifts, some back squats. Then I'm going to do another session where I'm going to clean and jerk, clean pulls, and some front squats. And you just stick with that, and you look for a progression along those with those weights. And really important is those blue lines, those blue ticks, start them way lighter than you think you should. So if you're snatching 80 and you're like 70% is kind of like 55 or 60, I would start at 45. So undershoot the first couple of weeks. There's always time to make it up.
You can never start too light. I've never seen someone mess up a program by starting too light. That's really important. Is undershooting is a good idea for the most part. It always pays off in the end. Overshooting always fucks you in the end. It always ruins people. It's one of the most common mistakes is people overshoot and then try to course correct, and they just won't admit to themselves that it's time to revert back and reset. A couple of weeks ago, when I started this particular training block of snatching, and I hit a 130, and it was okay. I had been snatching for a year and a half. It was fine, but instead of resetting immediately after, I wasted 2 or 3 weeks, about 2 weeks. I say you kind of give yourself a week to realize something's going on. Then you give yourself another week to think, okay, I probably should be resetting next week. Anything more than that, and you're being kind of egotistical, you're being kind of ignorant with your own programming. So I should have reset sooner, straight after that 130. Even though I knew better, it's still hard to program for yourself in those fashions, So after that, I reset, went back to 80, 90 kilo weights. I did make the mistake the second time. I hit it 140 2 weeks ago, and I immediately reset. And just building up again, So it is important just to know when to kind of let go. So stick to your time frames. If it went really well, that's fantastic. If it didn't go well, look back, see how did it go. Did you do your training? Did you do your mobility? Were you well rested? Look at all the variables that you can, and then try build up some knowledge for yourself over the years when you're trying to program. So having it recorded, having it somewhere, and try and have a lot of those details. More data when you're looking back is very useful. You don't need to analyze it while you're training. If anything, it's probably a bad idea, but looking back over a couple of months with a lot of data can be quite useful, because the more you know, the more information you can interpret, if you can interpret it correctly, of course. So that comes down to experience and realistic expectations and looking at a couple of those variables. So what's your max snatch at the moment, for example?
80 kilo.
And how long have you been training?
2 years.
And have you any injuries recently?
No.
Are you losing any body weight?
No.
Do you think you've any training obstacles coming up in the next 2 months? Is there any holidays? Is there anything that might stop you training consistently? And you kind of look at that then and you save 80 kilos. When did you hit 80 kilos last?
A year ago.
And then, look, what have you done since then is the thing? Have you done something like that?
trained.
Yeah, that's the problem, you see. So I bet you could hit 85 kilos in 2 months. Do you think that's realistic, Fitz? I didn't see much you're snatching. Could he hit 85 in 2 or 3 months?
You could probably hit 85 in a month.
Yeah. I promise you, it's not you can't do it, it's your potential. It's just, if you get that sorted out, that's the big thing that makes a difference. So I would say we're in halfway through June now. You could say at the end of August, my goal is to snatch 85. That's not an unrealistic goal. 5 kilos isn't a whole lot on top of 80. It's not a world record. It's a very realistic expectation from you. You've a very good mover. Your skill is very good. Your squat is enough to snatch 85. So you just look at that number and you look at what you're doing currently and you make an estimated guess. If it's more, fantastic. If it's less, no problem. If it's a PB, you still look at it and learn. It's being really diligent and really active at where you're going is the most important thing, not just floating along. Like when Fitz was talking about banging the magic happens with the snatch, it's not what we want. Banging the magic doesn't happen with programming. You need to be in a direction. You need to be super active, really aware of what's going on and not let yourself just kind of float along with the programming. So you pick your start point, pick your end point, pick your programming. And that doesn't mean you can't change it as you go along, but set some reasonable goals. Something like 2.5 to 5 kilos each time is very fair. And if it doesn't happen, that's fine. It's still far better to move along, because then if you made a plan, it didn't work, you can look back, alter the plan a little bit, or if it worked, you just go, okay, I'm going to do this again and work your way through that. So 85 in, say, 3 months is very realistic, 2.5 months for sure, if you put your head down and pick that particular plan you're going to follow. Never passive with programming, never passive with our training, always really intentional. So when you're a competitive athlete, if we're trying to make international standards, if we're trying to maybe secure funding for finance as a carded athlete or a professional athlete, then we've got to pick the most competitive class and what secures us the most money. But assuming you're not there, we need to look at what kind of body composition do I want to be at? How important is weightlifting in my life? Is it top 5? Is it top 2? Is it number 1? you need to look at what will make you happy, what's the healthiest. Weightlifting might be important to you, but it might not be important enough to become a super heavyweight. If you're like, okay, I'm 20 years old, I want to become more competitive, then in your case, gaining weight is the better option. Sensible weight, not too much, but progression on weight gain is very important. But look, if you're 37, if you're 47, gaining weight might be useful, but it's probably not the best idea. You know, it might even be not productive for your weightlifting. And then we have to look at things like, for example, the snatch responds usually better for a well-trained athlete when they lose weight. They come faster, positions are better, we have less soft tissue blocking those joints, so we can get a few degrees deeper into our positions. So usually for younger athletes, gaining weight is the option. Up until about the age of kind of 24 to 25, you're 6'1", 6'2"-ish?
I'm not sure. 1 meter and 91 centimeters.
Oh, 6'2" or 6'3", I think. So you're pretty tall. What are you? You're 90 kilos now, 95?
95, yeah.
So there's nothing wrong with maintaining your weight and seeing where it goes, especially as a younger athlete. That weight accrual will happen reasonably naturally if you're fueling yourself sufficiently, you're eating enough and you're training a lot and seeing where you naturally end up. I would never be super intentional for weightlifting about gaining a lot of weight. It doesn't end up well a lot of times unless you're super diligent. Sometimes it does, but where you naturally end up if you're training a lot and you're eating sufficiently is probably a good place to work at, thankfully, which is quite lucky for weightlifting. Now, losing weight is almost always going to be detrimental for your weightlifting, like cutting weight, either in the short term because your energy is lower, because you're cutting calories, or because in the long run you're losing a little bit of muscle mass, you've a little bit less tissue for being really stable in those lifts. So there's a lot that goes into it. I think, to be honest, for most people, most athletes we deal with, the vast majority of them, it's what are you going to be the happiest with? Like, what are you going to look at in the mirror? You know, you don't want to be 5'5" and 140 kilos. So it's up to you to be like, this kind of body shape I want. And like, I'm very pro people being like, no, okay, I want to be a little bit leaner, a little bit more muscular, even though it mightn't be the absolute best for my weightlifting, that's okay. But if someone comes to me and they're like, yeah, I don't care, I want to be the best in this particular section, I want to make international teams. You know, we've jiu-jitsu athletes who are trying to win international titles and black belts, and they're starving themselves for years on end. They're like literally 8% body fat. When an athlete last year going to Abu Dhabi, he was in the sauna for 4 days, like an hour, 2 or 3 hours per day total. Like, there's different things, you know, and it was worth it for him because he wanted to win a really prestigious title. But for the average weightlifter, I think being in a healthy body fat is best, eating sufficient food is best, and then, you know, if you've dreams of grandeur, then make some decisions for that, but it needs to be realistic. Or rather, I would advise people to be realistic. You know, if you're 40 years old and you've been weightlifting for 6 months and you're like, I want to make the world's team, you'd be like, hey, maybe not. But again, if you're 20 years old, you know, the world's your oyster. It's very hard to predict how good someone's going to be at weightlifting. There's some indicators that we'd see, but it's individual based and it's up to that person. So weight loss will affect it for sure. Weight gain will probably benefit it, but will it benefit your life as a global thing? That's the question. And only you could probably answer that in the end. So there's a particular bias that you would put on a session when you're doing sets and reps. So if we are doing 2 or 3 plus 1, we're kind of biasing towards more work on the clean, or we're more biasing towards being more fatigued before the clean to do a split jerk. So there's a couple of things we need to look at. Maybe we have a particular technical aspect in the clean that we want to work on. And if I do clean jerk, clean jerk, clean jerk, we're probably going to be too fatigued to focus as well as we could on each of those cleans. So we might go, okay, my jerk is pretty good. I'm going to do 3 cleans first and then a jerk, because I can go clean, pre-performance, focus on the same thing, clean again, focus on the same thing, assess, clean again, and fatigue that a little bit more. On the opposite side, you might want to go, no, I really need to work my jerks. My clean is pretty hot at the moment, so I'll do 5 sets of 1 plus 2 or 1 plus 3 and trying to progress along, something like that. So I might spend 3 weeks progressing that 5 sets of 1 plus 2 where I had 5 kilos, because I'm trying to bias towards the jerk, because I'm trying to get a little bit better with that jerk. So we want to, again, comes back to what is the plan? Where are you going? What are you trying to do? Where's the destination? What do you need to work on? is there a plan? Like, there's no point coming into doing one session of 3+1 and then next week doing a heavy single or something like that. You know, you need to be deciding on something, putting a particular bias on something, and then going somewhere with that. So heading in a trajectory, even if it doesn't seem like the most sensible, you're not really sure, it's still a better option of just being like, I'm going to give this a go and see what happens.
And how do I know on what should I focus on? If that's,
What do you miss most? What do you miss at heavyweights is a question. What feels the worst?
jerk, yeah.
Yeah, so jerk, I'll put the bias in the jerk for now and see. Weightlifting is all about what we call firefighting. There's a new fire every time. There's never not a fire. Something almost crops up. You know, my best snatch is 155 kilos. I've been training for 13 years, and I still have a coach, you know, because there's still new things. The things I'm working on are the things you guys are still focusing on. I'm still focusing on keeping my hips back. I'm still focusing on keeping my back extended, not bringing them in too early. I'm relaxing my arms a little bit more, trying to extend longer. You know, I'm focusing on the exact same stuff, and it all crops up. And maybe I fixed them 20 kilos ago, or maybe I fixed them at the same weight 3 years ago, but they'll crop up, you know. So it's just fighting fires, constantly assessing what's going on. It's an ever-evolving process with weightlifting. And, you know, it's like a whack-a-mole thing. You hit one of them, pops up somewhere else. You hit that again, might pop up same thing. Something new might pop up. Ad nauseum, until you want to stop weightlifting. That's what gets people the most, is that they're not on a trajectory, there's new problems, they're not fixing the problems, and then we just end up spinning our wheels for, you know, you end up with a year of no progress, and then 2 years no progress, and suddenly you're someone who hasn't progressed their snatch in 2 or 3 years, and you're kind of not even sure what happened, you know, because you didn't just pick something and go with it. I've had someone win Masters Worlds. He was 47 when he won Masters Worlds. He came to me. He's very good athlete. He'd been a collegiate level athlete in the US 25 years before that. Had done some power cleans and power snatches fairly diligently. And he'd gotten up to a 90 kilo power snatch when he was in college. Came to me with about the same again. And he had like a 120 power clean. So it was about the same. So he'd maintained it quite well. He'd stayed active and collegiate. And he came to me and he was about 45. And after 2 years, we ended up with a 105 full snatch and a 130 clean and jerk. So he made progress compared to these numbers when he was younger, you know. So, look, you're not going to end up snatching 180 if you start older, but age is less important. What the problem where the age thing came from in weightlifting was that we used to have weightlifters in very intense ex-Soviet systems. They'd start weightlifting when they were 8 years old. They would be training day and night, non-stop. They usually end up taking PEDs in their late teens, maybe mid-teens, working their way through that. And then by the time they hit 30, they have 25 years of weightlifting done. They don't want to keep weightlifting. They want to stop at 30, you know. They don't want to keep doing that. But you as athletes, whatever age you are, you're not at that stage, you know. You haven't done 22 years of weightlifting. You can definitely progress from where you are up until, you know, in your 50s maybe, but you know, that's a long time left to progress for people. So there's so many things available to you, like that soft tissue work, very important. Mobility, smart training, technique, time to train, enthusiasm, places to train. Very often is when those lifters got to 30, it wasn't that they couldn't keep progressing, because we're seeing lots of them progressing now. You know, we see people like Liu Xiaojun, one of the most famous weightlifters. You know, he was probably going to make his fifth Olympics or fourth Olympics. You know, we had people like Blaine McConnell. I don't know if you've seen him. He snatched 165. He was 37, and he'd never really done. He'd only started weightlifting 2 or 3 years. Now he'd been a very strong athlete, of course, and a bobsleigh athlete. But there's a lot of possibility left for sure, at least in the people's 40s. And then if you know people using TRT, peptides, and stuff like that, it all extends it drastically. If people so wish to go that route, for sure. But age isn't the reason people don't progress. This is the reason people don't progress. Again, you don't really need to program mobility as per se. You just need to be diligent with it. Consistent is the big thing, because the progression doesn't really need to progress too much from where you are, because it'll happen quite naturally if the mobility is working. So the big thing mobility is, if you don't see an improvement after 1 or 2 sessions, it's probably you're either doing it wrong or it's not going to work for what you want. If you see any improvement from it, then it lets you know that it's doing something. So then I would stick with that, and usually that modulation happens quite intuitively. Like, you know if something feels tight, and you know that as you push it, it might feel a little bit less tight. So it happens pretty intuitively in terms of progression for mobility work. So soft tissue work, stretching, all of that, it progresses quite well by itself. So diligence and frequency is more important than worrying about what you're going to do for mobility, for sure. The consistency of that is the big thing for most people. It's where people get caught a lot and they don't see the progress. Is they spend 5 minutes rolling and they're like, my knee still hurts, you know. But it should be, let me spend a month doing this and see if my knee still hurts, instead of a 5 minutes, 1 day a week, you know. So you're probably somewhere along, like if you're missing the triples or singles or something like that, or are you missing a max, do you mean?
No, like triples.
Okay.
You can do
Yeah.
doubles, let's say, but you are programmed triples.
Yes. So assuming the progression was reasonable, then you've probably, realistically, you've probably set an unreasonable progression there. So if I was supposed to do 5 by 3 at 100 this week, and I did that, and then next week I'm supposed to do 4 by 3 at 105, and suddenly I can't get 1 or 2 reps, or I only get 2 sets of 2, there's probably something wrong there, because that's a reasonable progression, you know. Whereas if this week I do 5 by 3 at 100, but next week I'm supposed to do 5 by 3 at 120, and my max is 125, it's probably unreasonable. So we need to look at, were the progressions reasonable? And then if they were, we're looking at, did you do enough volume in that initial phase? Because that's sometimes what catches people out. They don't do enough, say, 10s and 8s and 6s, for example. They start in heavy in their 5s and 5 by 3, and then you suddenly run out of runway of somewhere to go. Then we look at other variables. Did I get enough sleep? Am I sick? Am I injured? Am I really stressed? Did I eat enough food? So we look at those things and see what's going on. So assuming the program is correct and assuming it's reasonable progression, that's where we go, okay, what came before this? What other factors might be impacting it? And usually the answers are pretty obvious in those particular situations. You know, it's never been a mystery. We've never met a case where we've been stumped. You know, no one's ever asked us, myself and Dara, that something has been completely, we just been like, oh my God, I can't believe you've hit that. There's always a reason. And people are funny. You'll know the reason. I guarantee you there's a 99% chance you'll know. And we'll be talking and then half an hour later and they're like, oh, you know, I did get hit by a car yesterday. So I think that, you know, there's people know why, you know, it's very obvious when you think about it. Some people avoid the answer a little bit, but those answers are there. So assuming that kind of progression is somewhat reasonable, like if you were supposed to do 4 by 3 at 105 next week, and this week you did 105 by 3, but you ended up doing 3 sets of 3 and 1 double. You know, that's okay. You missed 1 rep, not a big deal. So you just kind of temper what did you end up actually doing and what was reasonable progressions. And then if it was reasonable, decide what might have caused that. Important thing to do there then though is not waste time trying to fix that, not waste time trying to be like, no, I can get this set. Maybe sometimes you can. Maybe something really bad happened that day and you're like, no, I was actually on a really good trajectory. So next week I'll just do it again, or in 2 days' time I'll do it again. That's great. But if everything was okay and you didn't hit it, don't waste time. Go back to the start. The time you'll waste trying to fix that would be far outstripped by the time of just resetting and going back again. So it's a good tactic if, for example, you have far more than you'll ever need for squatting, so compared to your lifts. So if you are snatching 60 kilos now and you did a 250 kilo back squat, you know, or you'll see elite international weightlifters, they will hit their best back squat and then never hit it again. They might hit it for 10 years, but they'll maintain because they'll have more than enough. Lashta is a great example. You know, we've never seen Lashta go heavy, but we've seen him do like 320, 330 for triples, and that's the most, because he's far in excess of what he needs. But most people aren't in that position. Most people need that bigger back squat. Most people need to be progressing to bigger numbers. So if we're trying to snatch 100 kilos, we like to see people, for example, somewhere in the region of 160 to 180 kilo back squat. And then just because we're there, it doesn't mean we let up on the squat. We might let up for a week or two. So if we're coming into those last 2 blue dots and we're coming for a heavy session, we might let up on the squat, or we might peak it before and then come to snatching. But realistically, you also want to be operating with the view that what are you going to be trying to do in the future? Because I don't think you're going to want to stop at 100 kilos. Most people don't. If you can snatch 100, they're like, right, I probably want to do 105. So we need to be operating with some kind of fat in the system, some kind of leniency. So we go, I don't want to waste too much time here. I want to have 200 there ready for me when I try snatch 105. So for the vast majority of amateur lifters, we want to be progressing both of those at the same time and not sticking with anything for too long. So for those last 2 or 3 weeks, 2 weeks, we'll maintain a little bit, or we'll peak it a bit beforehand and we'll deload the squat while we do a heavier snatch. But we always want to be going somewhere again, realistically. So I know we were talking earlier about what I'm doing on my squat at the moment, but I am that person with that far in excess of what I needed, you know, compared to my lifts now. So it's easy for me to do that. But for everyone else, you need to be bringing both of those up. And sometimes you'll spend a bit more time on the squat, maybe. For example, you're front squatting 87.5 and the clean is 82.5. So in your case, it might be useful for maybe a couple of weeks, maybe 2 months, just to put a little bit of a head start on your squatting. It's not always the case, but that's a very close ratio where we'll tailor back from the snatch and clean and jerk a little bit. We'll keep doing lots of snatch, clean and jerking, but we won't be pushing it super hard, and we'll be pushing the squat really hard. And then we'll try and get a big head start, or at least get a head start on the progression, where we'll try and get beyond the 87.5, we'll try to get to 95, and then we'll tailor back that squat a little bit, and we'll go, okay, snatching, clean and jerking, but even then you wouldn't lose focus on the squat, you'd still try and eke it along, but you wouldn't put as much emphasis on that. Well, I'd always listen to your coaches. The first thing I would say would be a bias from coming from the industry. I'd be like, listen to your coach, trust them, you know, because the worst thing you can do is not believe in that process.
Yeah.
The worst thing, like I said, a bad program is still better than no program. And athletes suffer the most when they're kind of like, oh, I don't know if this is right. Now, you might be correct. You could be correct in your assessment or whatever it is, or any of you, when you're looking at your coach's programming and you're like, this looks kind of dumb, you know. But even in those scenarios, some athletes progress really well because we call it brute force and pig ignorance in Ireland, where they're just like, yeah, this is the thing. I'm committed to this. The big thing from the Bulgarian method, they just had athletes committed, and the programming was obviously terrible, but they were just all in on that programming, and they believed in it. Or we'll see athletes, you know, like people like Michael Jordan talking about their kind of S&C work, or we'll see, I think it was like the Pittsburgh Steelers in the NFL before and stuff. So you might look at their S&C work now and you might be like, that's kind of dumb, but they just went after it, you know. So similar programming, but ultimately at the end of the day, better programming is better, you know. So it's kind of, I would say listen to the program, but a good program wouldn't have you asking those questions and you shouldn't really be confused. On the converse side, I will say it's important to know what you don't know. Not saying you in particular, but just in general. It's to understand that you mightn't really understanding programming, and just because it doesn't make sense to you doesn't mean it's wrong. It just might mean you don't understand it, you know. So there's a couple of things there at play. I don't know what your program is like. I don't know your coach or anything, obviously, so it's not a comment on anyone. But it is important just to be aware. And they could be wrong, or you could be wrong, equally likely. So it's, you know, it's an unfortunate scenario. It's like any profession, you know, not everyone's a great doctor, not everyone's a great engineer, not everyone's a great chef. So it's kind of, you know, obviously I don't know them. So that's the answer to that question. But unless you have a better option, my default would be, yeah, this is the best program in the world. I love this. This is going to get me to 85 or 90. That's the way I'd approach it.